The Lost Boys looked smooth on the outside, but behind the scenes, one actor got fired for showing up high, another got slapped by the director. This movie started as The Goonies with vampires and almost starred Jim Carrey. And the town where they filmed was covering up real serial killings. So this is the part nobody tells you about the most iconic vampire film of the 80s. So the movie's set in Santa Carla, right? But it's actually Santa Cruz, California. Back in the early 70s, Santa Cruz had a horrible reputation, literally called the murder capital of the world. In just 30 months between 1970 and 1973, there were 28 murders committed by 3 separate serial killers: John Linley Frazier, Herbert Mullen, and Ed Kemper. Pretty obvious why the town didn't exactly want a vampire movie using their real name, right? That's why in the film it's Santa Carla instead. And there's even a sneaky reference, the murder capital of the world graffiti you see behind the billboard in the movie, that's directly referencing those real-life murders in Santa Cruz. At the beginning, there's that famous merry-go-round scene. Pay attention. It secretly shows you the exact order the Lost Boys die later in the film. Marco first, then Paul, Dwayne, and finally David. It's subtle, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. Another cool thing, remember when the vampires jump off that bridge? Notice something. They jump in exactly the same order they die later in the film. By the way, some people online still say that Bridge is the one in Alabama, famous for the tragic '93 Amtrak crash. Totally false. It's actually a bridge in California. That rumor's already been debunked. Believe it or not, The Lost Boys started as a kids' movie, a straight-up vampire version of The Goonies. Characters were younger, around 11 or 12, with flashlights and tree houses. Even the vampires weren't cool or dangerous. They were old, wrinkly monsters. Richard Donner, the guy who directed The Goonies, was supposed to do it, but he left to make Lethal Weapon, so the project stalled out. Then Joel Schumacher showed up, flipped through the script and said, "I'll do it, but it's gotta be sexy, scary, adult." Suddenly, those little kids became teenagers. The kiddie humor was out, replaced by motorcycles, blood, and seduction. Schumacher completely changed the entire vibe. It became about temptation, power, and teenage angst. Why? Simple, Schumacher later explained. Vampires are hot. They're the only erotic monsters. Frankenstein is not hot. Funny enough, there's still one Goonies shout-out. Check out the scene in Max's video store. There's one copy of The Goonies right on the shelf behind them. This movie could have been a straight-up comedy. Seriously, Jim Carrey auditioned to play David. Remember, he'd already been a vampire in Once Bitten, and Ben Stiller tried out for one of the Frog Brothers. Both were young and funny, but Schumacher didn't want comedy. He wanted myth, danger, seduction. So he passed on both of them. Imagine The Lost Boys starring Jim Carrey cracking jokes instead of Kiefer Sutherland. Totally different vibe. Speaking of casting, Kiefer Sutherland almost turned this down. Didn't want to do it at first. But then he heard director Joel Schumacher had gotten In Excess and Jimmy Barnes to do songs for the soundtrack. Kiefer had spent time in Australia as a kid and loved their music. That was enough to change his mind, and the rest is history. Jason Patric wasn't exactly excited to be in a vampire movie too. He actually said straight up he didn't want to be flying around wearing fangs. Schumacher had to convince him over several meetings. Even after he agreed, Patrick still didn't like the script, especially having to say his own character's name. He thought it sounded ridiculous. Result? Watch carefully. Everyone else says Michael constantly, but he never says it himself, not once. Corey Feldman, Edgar Frog himself, almost didn't end up in the movie. At the time, he was having serious drug issues, showed up one day totally messed up from a cocaine binge. Schumacher lost it, fired him immediately because Corey couldn't even stay awake. But the next day, Feldman apologized, swore he'd stay clean and show up ready. Schumacher gave him another chance, and thankfully Corey kept his word. Imagine this film without Feldman or Sutherland or Patrick. Completely different movie. This movie was actually the first film Corey Haim and Corey Feldman ever did together. They met on set, both teenagers, super nervous, trying way too hard to look cool under all those lights and cameras. The older actors were out partying every night, so these two kids just ended up hanging together in the hotel, watching movies, going to the arcade, typical teenage stuff. That bond got tight real fast. They had no idea yet, but the Lost Boys was about to completely change their lives, and not necessarily in a good way. Pretty soon, Hollywood noticed their chemistry and branded them the two Corys. They became way more than just friends. It was a whole brand. More movies came in, bigger roles, more money, more pressure. But nobody bothered to warn them what fame could do when you get it too young and too fast. It broke them both down. Addiction followed, their friendship fractured, and eventually, they drifted apart. When Corey Haim died in 2010, Feldman called it the hardest goodbye he'd ever faced. He didn't just lose his best friend, he lost a part of himself. Despite all the later pain, Corey Haim always looked back on making The Lost Boys as one of the greatest personal times in his life. Joel Schumacher specifically wanted Feldman's character to look and act like the tough guy action heroes of that era. He literally told him to go rent Sylvester Stallone and Chuck Norris movies and copy their style. And if you watch the movie again, Feldman is straight up doing a Stallone impression. Once you notice, you can't unsee it. And talking about Schumacher, there's this shocking moment during production that he admitted himself. Brooke McCarter, who played Paul, wasn't performing how Schumacher wanted, and the director completely lost it. He literally slapped McCarter and shoved a door at him. Schumacher later said, "I'd never done that before and never again. It's outrageous, and honestly, he should have reported me." He apologized many times afterward, clearly ashamed, but that actually happened. Remember the dinner scene? The gross-out moment with maggots and worms? Well, those were real, kinda. The cast was eating regular rice and noodles, but behind the scenes, the crew used two almost identical takeout containers. One just had regular rice. The other? Same rice, but with live mealworms dumped on top to look like maggots. They shot the wide shot with the clean rice first, then cut to a tight close-up where they'd swapped in the container with the worms. The cut was super quick, just fast enough to trick your brain into thinking the food changed right in front of you. What makes it even better is that Jason Patric, who played Michael, didn't actually know exactly when they were going to cut to the worms. So his reaction, all that disgust, that's real. And here's one lots of people still miss. Alex Winter, who played Marco, one of the Lost Boys, went on to star in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. He was literally Bill's best friend, but most casual viewers have no idea it's the same actor. The vampire makeup and wild hair totally hid him. That vampire cave they hang out in? It wasn't just a studio set built from scratch. The designers actually scavenged parts from a real abandoned amusement park in Santa Cruz. They used pieces from a wrecked carousel, a burned-out funhouse, real chandeliers. All that creepy decor was genuinely salvaged. The studio tried covering that up afterward, worried about insurance problems, but it all stayed in the movie. Finally, remember the weirdly iconic scene with the oiled-up saxophone guy playing on the dock? That's Tim Capello, who was actually touring with Tina Turner during her massive comeback concerts in the mid-'80s. After the movie, he got weirdly popular, so much so that he had two big TV offers, one to star as a sax-playing vampire hunter, basically imagine Buffy with saxophone solos, and another to host his own HBO late-night variety show in character. He turned both down immediately. He said doing either show would have ruined the mystery. Honestly, he's probably right.